Now, a lot of talk about the Aberdeen crowd last week being out of order. Obviously, you saw Michael Van Guren go up and talk to the match referee after the final. But can anything be done to get the best of order from a crowd of that size?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And disappointed to see these things happen, but you've got to say, not really surprising, is it, these days? And we've spoken about it on the show in the past. We spoke about it after the last World Championship at Ali Pali, that partisan crowd and the nature of the beast, I guess, with the PDC, what they've created. And as much as we love seeing these games played in front of these large venues with thousands watching, we know that all it takes is one or two in the crowd to start whistling, and it can put the players off. You speak to the players, they'll tell you that constant noise, it doesn't really put them off. They get used to it. But when you've got one or two people whistling, that's when it can seep through, and it can be off-putting. And we saw it after, didn't we? Johnny Clayton spoke about it in his press conference after. He said he was happy to win the night, but he was upset with the crowd, and it kind of tarnished what he did that night. And Michael went up to Russ Bray, the referee, after the game and said how upset he was with the crowd. And we saw Russ, I think, say thank you to the crowd at one point in that final, but I don't think that's really enough, is it? And we joke on Twitter, hashtag booing the car park campaign, the infamous video at Lakeside, Rab Butler pausing play at Lakeside to tell the crowd, if you want to boo, go in the car park. I don't think we'll ever see Russ or any of the PDC referees do that. But in fairness, we did see George Noble not so long back on the Euro Tour address the crowd. I think it was Joe Cullen against Daryl Gurney. It might have been another game, but he told the crowd to behave or he'd take the players off stage. So I guess you've got to get to that point where you threaten to take the players off for the crowd to behave. Will we ever get to that point? I don't know. I don't think we've seen that happen too many times, especially in a Premier League night or an event of that magnitude. But maybe this is something that it needs to get to a certain point for the PDC to address it. When the players are complaining about it, you need to keep the players happy. So if we're seeing this happen regularly and the players complain about it and it's what people are talking about, then you'd imagine the PDC will probably take more of a proactive approach. But at this moment in time, I think they're just going to let it ride. But if it continues to happen and the players keep complaining about it, then something's got to be done about it. But what can you do with a crowd of thousands of people? It's a tricky one, but disappointing that the darts didn't do the talking in the end, because there was some good games of darts and we don't really want to be talking about the crowd.
Yeah, and usually when we've been talking about the crowd, because we've had a similar question to this before, it's been in relation to like what we saw in the quarterfinals and semifinals with the partisan atmosphere, where Johnny Clayton was getting booed against Gary Anderson, and then Johnny Clayton was getting booed against Peter Wright as he knocks out the two Scottish players. Although it seemed like the crowd did not forgive him for that, because they continued to boo him in the final against Michael Van Guren. But what we haven't talked as much about, but does occur, is the whistling and the other stuff that is not directed at one player, but is just intended to put both players off. And that's what needs to be cracked down upon. I mean, yes, I think the booing is obnoxious when it's based on partisan reasons, but I don't care as much in the Premier League. It's an exhibition. This event is advertised, especially nights like this, as the local players coming home. Never mind that Gary Anderson and Peter Wright, instead of living in the north of Scotland, live in the south of England. We'll ignore that fact. It's advertised as these players coming home. It's why when we had the challengers in, this was the particular night that John Henderson played in twice, and he was given the hero's welcome, even though as well he is from a little bit outside Aberdeen in Huntly. I don't care as much about that in the Premier League, because it's an exhibition and it is designed to bring the players, and particularly for a lot of these players, the hometown players, or at least as close to hometown as possible, to the fans. But what George Noble did during the Euro Tour, I think, is more in line with what needs to start happening, because it's been getting worse and worse. Although, since that happened, the last Euro Tour actually went pretty smoothly. So I think it will have a deterrent effect once quote-unquote fans start getting thrown out or given their last warning before being thrown out. Because, yes, some people will be so drunk that they don't even know that people have been thrown out. But for the most part, when you're hearing that they're throwing people out of the crowd for their behavior and for putting off the players and for intentionally putting off the players, then there will be some sort of change. Maybe not immediate, but pretty darn quickly once that word starts to spread. But I don't think much needs to be changed for Premier League and other exhibitions, because it is just that. This is an exhibition. And it's good for the players to be able to learn how to handle it for when they encounter it elsewhere. But in the Euro Tour and in other ranked events, this is the player's livelihood. This is how they determine whether they even stay on tour for maybe not Clayton or Van Gogh right now, but for many of the players who will be competing in any given year at tour, or make sure they get to the World Championships. That's where something needs to be done, especially when you have targeted abuse towards one player or by just one or two people in the crowd. I think we're moving towards that. I think George Noble used those stronger words than we've heard before, probably because the PDC have decided they want to begin to crack down to some extent. That's just speculation on my part, but I think it's a good speculation because we hadn't heard him say anything to that extent of threatening to take the players off before. But I don't think anything needs to be done in the Premier League. It is an exhibition, and if they want to boo based on country, I normally am against that, but in the Premier League, I just don't care.